In this video, I'll show you how to navigate around 3D space in Cinema 4D. Now, in order to move yourself around or your camera around in 3D space, you're going to need to use the 1, 2, or the 3 keys on the keyboard, and these keys can be the ones on the main keyboard or the ones on the numeric keypad depending on the layout of your keyboard, together with, most of the times, your left mouse button. Here's what I mean. If you hold down number 1 and left click and drag, this is called panning. So you'll be moving around the space like this, so you can go up, down, left and right, called panning. If you hold down number 2 and then click and drag, you can zoom in or out. And if you hold down number 3 and click and drag, you can do this thing called orbiting, so you move around the space. While I was doing this, you may have noticed 3 arrows in the center of the screen. Now these arrows are called x-axis, y-axis, and the z-axis. X is always going to be pointing left to right, and y is always pointing up and down, and z is always pointing backwards and forwards. And these arrows are color-coded, so x is always going to be red, y is always going to be green, and z is always going to be blue. One easy way to remember this is if you write down x, y, and z on top of each other, and right next to it if you write down RGB, like the RGB color mode that you may be familiar with, and if you put them side by side, x always corresponds to red, y always corresponds to green, and z always corresponds to blue. That's an easy way to remember it. If you ever forget these shortcuts, the 1, 2, and 3 shortcuts, which are really useful so you shouldn't forget them, but let's say you did, if you go to the top right corner of your viewport, you have the 1 key here, and 2, and 3. So if I click and drag this button around, that's the same thing as doing 1 and drag, and this is the same as clicking 2 and dragging, and this is the same as 3 and drag. And there's one more button on the side, which is a middle click. If you're using a 3-button mouse, like the ones with the wheels, if you actually click on the wheel, it's the same as clicking on this button. If I click on this, this takes me up to the 4-up view, which shows me the perspective view, which is what I was looking at earlier, and then the same scene from the top, and from the right, and the front. So these other views, called orthographic views, are going to be quite useful when it comes to modeling precisely and animating exactly where you want the objects to go to. An alternative way of opening those windows up is by pressing F5 on the keyboard. So if I just tap F5, it takes me back up to this 4-up view, the orthographic views, and I can actually use the F keys going from F1, which is the perspective view, and F2 is the top view, F3 is the right view, and F4 is the front view, and F5 finally is the 4-up view, the perspective, top, right, and front views all at the same time. At any point, if I go up here and just press F1, that's going to take me back to the perspective view where I was at originally. Earlier on, we said that the 1, 2, and 3 keys are usually used with the left mouse button. Now sometimes you actually use these keys together with the right mouse button in order to first change the perspective of the camera and secondly to tilt the head of the camera. Here's what I mean. Normally we know this. If I hold down 2 and left click and drag towards right, we know that this pushes us in, and if I drag towards left, it pulls us back out. But instead of the left click, if I right click with the 2 key and drag towards right, instead of pushing us in, it actually zooms in, so it changes the focal length of the lens. Or if I drag towards left, it again zooms out instead of pulling us out, so again it changes the focal length of the lens going towards a wide angle lens now. And same thing works if I hold down number 3, instead of left clicking, which is orbiting around the scene, if I right click with number 3 and drag towards left or right, this will tilt the head of the camera as such. When you make a change like this and you want to go back to your previous view, the best way to do that is by going to the cameras menu at the top and you pick any other camera from here. Let's say I pick the left view, and if I go back to cameras and pick the perspective camera again, it takes us back to how it was set initially.